Good afternoon. I'm Patrick South. I'm with the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Very excited to be here this afternoon alongside an impressive list of panelists here. I feel like I'm obliged to say something about the fact that we're between you and drinks and blah, blah, blah. We're going to talk about why digital assets matter. That's no surprise, obviously, to this audience, but what we really want to address is what is the target market that we're looking for broader adoption at this point? And I'd like to turn it over to my panelists quickly to kind of walk through who you are, the companies you represent, and we'll dive into questions afterwards. Muneeb?
Hi, everyone. Muneeb, co-founder and CEO of Blockstack. Blockstack is a decentralized computing platform, and we have more than 100 startups built on top of us with real decentralized applications that you can try out and use.
My name is Donna Riddell, and I now split my time between angel investing, where I'm at New York Angels, and teaching at Fordham Law School, where I'm teaching blockchain, cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and I spend time at the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance as well.
Hello, I'm Mance Harmon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hedera Hashgraph. Hashgraph is an alternative to blockchain in terms of technology. Hedera is a public distributed ledger built on Hashgraph that is enterprise grade. It's owned and governed by global blue chip organizations. And so we marry both modern tech that has fantastic performance and security along with a governance model that makes it possible for mainstream organizations and enterprises to trust the platform on which they're building.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Pandolfino. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at the Founders Bank project. We're aiming to build a corporate challenger bank focused on servicing tech companies with a very strong focus on crypto and blockchain.
Thank you. Donna, I want to start with you quickly. Some of the conversations we've been having around the educational issues in the space, we'll call it, is we look to bring in a new wave of adoption to digital assets. There's a lot of misuse of nomenclature, and there's kind of a variance in how terminology is being used. Kind of given your position at the university and some of the things that you're seeing in the industry, can you walk us through some of the issues that we're seeing and how education may address that?
Sure. I mean, it's a theme that I've been talking about for a while, is terminology. One that we use a lot of words interchangeably, so sometimes people will say it's a digital security. Well, if you say it's a digital security, then immediately you're in one regulatory regime. If you say a digital asset, then I'm not exactly sure if you're talking about a crypto asset, as in Bitcoin, or if you really mean a digital security asset. So we really want to clarify, and we want to make sure that people know what we're talking about. It came up the other day, and I posed a kind of, not a challenge, but to create an initiative. And Tanya Evans, who's a professor at in New Hampshire, she and I started, and we'll probably ask the tech people to open source it for us, to create some definition so that when people go into a panel and everybody isn't in the blockchain space, that they can say this is what blockchain means, or this is what a digital asset is. And that way, not only the people in the audience that are not from the blockchain cryptocurrency world, but for investors, for potential investors. If we're not clear the way we speak about something, they're clearly going to be confused. So we need to be consistent in what we talk about, how we think about, and how we frame the issues. That's not to say we shouldn't have lots of great debates, which we have all the time, but at least we'll know which words we're using when we're debating.
Yeah, absolutely. Muneeb, fascinated by what Blockstack is doing, and there's been a lot of buzz around you recently, so hopefully later in the conversation we can talk a little bit about the Reg A Plus announcement. What I'd like to start with, though, is you look at Web 3.0 and how it's enabling new business models. There's a wide variety of monetization that's occurring at data silos today by varying organizations. How are you displacing that, and kind of what does that new paradigm engender?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the Reg A. So we have done a public filing with the SEC, and my lawyers would like to give you a disclaimer that anything I say could be treated as testing the waters, but I'm not selling anything to anyone over here. In terms of like what people are calling Web 3.0 or a decentralized internet, decentralized web, different terminology for kind of like the same thing. I think the real opportunity over there is if you look at kind of like the last 2 decades of computing, basically what happened is that we entered this model where companies like Google or Facebook would offer you a free service, and they're really monetizing user data, right? So they're in the business of knowing more and more about you. And Google has never charged you a software license, right? Like everything is free. They're running all the infrastructure and the cloud computing, and just like kind of like snooping around people's data to monetize it. And the work that we're doing with decentralized computing is to effectively change that. Users get their own private data lockers, and you're not reliant on large tech companies, or actually you're not reliant on remote servers that much anyway. Most of the applications that I mentioned, they are running locally on the client side, on your laptops, on your mobile devices, and it's a very different compute model, but it would have very interesting kind of like implications for business models that we use on the internet today, because most of the successful companies, they're effectively ad networks, and that's how they monetize. So I think the long-term implications are actually going to be more towards what kind of business models emerge for such applications.
So kind of segueing from the importance of new business models that are emerging, Mance, you've put a lot of importance on governance and really placed a strong bet there. Can you kind of walk us through what the Hedera Governance Council looks like, why you've really stressed the importance of that, and some of the entities that you currently have involved?
Yeah, sure. So the interesting thing is that when you think about governance in general, it's better to have a group of decision makers rather than a dictator, right? And the reason for that is because it's less likely that a group of decision makers will be somehow corrupted or bribed into doing something that's not in the best interest of the community than it is to influence a single dictator. Also, but you don't want to take it too far. And what I mean by that is that, for example, maybe it's not a good idea to ask an entire community to, say, vote on monetary policy associated for the dollar. If you have a dollar, maybe we don't want to give you the right to vote on monetary policy. You want a group of experts that are making the decisions. And so this industry as a whole has sort of settled into the model where there is a council of some form. There are a set of core developers, maybe there's a foundation, but somebody, a group of people are making decisions about how to guide the particular code base or the network, what features go into it, what the fees are that are charged for the services, et cetera. The problem is that, by and large, everything in this market is pure open source. And what that means is that the governing body, whomever it is, doesn't really have the teeth that are needed to govern. And without the mechanisms to sort of compel the market, if you will, to adopt the changes established by the governing body, what you end up with is a situation that we've seen play out over years now, where a lot of the, say, miners, for example, say you have 100 miners, you have 30 of them disagree with the direction of the platform, they'll decide to copy the platform, go create a competing platform, a competing network, and competing cryptocurrency. That creates chaos in the market and represents a market hindrance to mainstream adoption. Now, having said that, I understand that may be very controversial. It's also been very good for the market, and I believe that and acknowledge that. However, when it comes to the decisions of enterprises that are considering spending $3, $4, $5 million building an application on top of one of these platforms, it represents risk. And so what we've done is simply acknowledge the fact that somebody is making a decision. And we've tried to design a governing council that is representative of the entire market, meaning that we have asked global enterprises that are respected by their industries. They have the very best brands, largest market caps, across 18 sectors of the market, geo-distributed around the world to represent all jurisdictions, to participate in a meaningful way in the governance of this platform. And they're term limited, so they're not members forever. By doing this, we've come up with a governing model or a governance model that makes it possible to represent all interests, and we've given that council teeth, meaning that we've built in both technical controls as well as legal controls that makes it possible for them to compel those that are running the nodes in the network to adapt or to adopt the changes that are made by the governing council. By doing this, we feel like we've checked the boxes that are needed to establish trust in a global public network that appeals to the mainstream businesses and enterprises.
I appreciate you trying to say something controversial there. We'll take all the controversial thoughts we can get on this panel. Paula, when we look at the infrastructure that's being built to really enable this next wave of adoption that we're talking about, some of the rails that you're building over at Founders Bank are quite interesting. So can you chat about how you're bridging the gap between traditional financial institutions and kind of the emerging innovative crypto companies and some of the experiences that they're going through with the traditional banking system today?
Yeah, I mean, traditional banks have not been built for purpose. I mean, taking a step back, they have really old, archaic legacy infrastructure, policies and procedures that have not been changed for a very long time. And we believe that the reason why they are so reluctant to bank the community, and it's particularly in crypto and blockchain, is a result of their inability to be able to bank correctly. They always talk about this ecosystem as being the unbankable. We think they are the unbanked, all the people here. And you know, there's not really been a project that has been built for purpose from scratch, understanding the pain points that are currently existing, understanding what the needs of the customers are, and building a technology stack and infrastructure with policies and procedures which are 21st century to be able to bank this industry. And I think really that was the genesis and the main mission of this project, is to be able to be that bank, the go-to home for all the crypto and blockchain companies in particular.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, I went to Mississippi, and talking back about terminology, nobody knew where I was in the Delta what a blockchain is. But they do have a very tough road before them. And yet last night we were talking that there was an incident where somebody was near a kind of stadium, and it was raining and pouring, and a man was holding a sign saying, you know, park in my garage, and in my driveway it's $20. And the gentleman said to me, well, God, can you imagine standing outside with a poncho and holding up a sign for $20? And I said, well, that's the exact person we need to help, because that person pays $12 a month at fees to whatever bank they are, and that's $150 a year that we could save them. And if in the last panel they were talking about packaging and repackaging and selling data, if you could repackage and sell your data in some efficient way, that might be $20 a month, and that's going to be $240. And before we know it, that person who is standing there with the sign for $20, we've repurposed different parts of their payments and given them value in something in a way that they wouldn't have it before. So I think that we spend a lot of time talking to one another, and we need to figure out how we bring the conversation to the individual that really doesn't know what blockchain is, and probably maybe won't for a very, very long time, but will know if that fee isn't on their bank account. That they will really notice the difference in.
At the end of the day, right, as we look to the next wave of adoption, does that individual really need to know and fully understand what blockchain is, or do they just need an application closest to them in which they're consuming this technology in some capacity, but it's making their lives easier and they're benefiting from it, whether it's financial inclusion or otherwise?
I mean, I don't think most people know anymore that what internet they're working on, or how that magic attachment gets there in their email, and how they can talk to different emails where 20 years ago you couldn't. So I don't think that it's going to matter to them what the rails are underneath. the efficiency of it and how it touches them and how it can, in some ways, just slightly improve their lives. And maybe then that slight becomes a little bit more than just one step, it becomes 2 steps higher. And it does it not only for themselves, but it does it for their kids in a substantial way that we can quantify what the difference is, and not just thinking about only the rails. I mean, we need those things, and everything that everybody's building here is incredibly important. But we just need to think about how we bring in the other people as the infrastructure gets built.
I don't know if there's any other thoughts. Maybe.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking at kind of like the average internet user, definitely they don't care, and they're probably never going to know how the underlying stuff works. But let's take Airbnb as an example. I think once Airbnb had a compelling use case for users that, hey, you can actually make money by renting out your apartment, and they were creating an economy that, look at the general sharing economy. It's taking off in all sorts of different countries around the world, and because there are compelling incentives for people to participate in those applications and in those economies. So similarly, I think there is a fairly large potential economy, let's, for the lack of a better term, call it the data economy, where right now there are people out there who are paying Google or Facebook for your data, right? And there are many middlemen there as well. It's a fairly inefficient system. Like there are 8 different parties and 10 different parties involved before an ad is shown to an internet user. And you can actually make that system much more efficient. You can actually make it where the users are in control. They opt into sharing what they want to share, and you can potentially incentivize them to monetize their data directly. And I think those are the types of use cases that we might see appear as decentralized computing infrastructure gets figured out. I think we should like realize what stage we're in. I would say that there are some projects that are in the infrastructure building phase, and they're getting developers to build real stuff. Most of the industry is kind of like in the R&D phase, right? And with all sorts of pie in the sky ideas that are being tried, which is a good thing. Like I think people should go out and try all of that. But generally, our crypto industry, the signal to noise ratio and the hype to actual technology ratio tends to be very, very bad in our industry, and which is something that we hope changes over the years.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'd love to segue over and touch on some regulatory items quickly, because I think, again, as we look to the next wave of adoption, that certainly matters. Donna, the individual that you were referencing, holding up a sign in a parking space, they may not be an accredited investor. And to be able to provide access to these type of digital assets that may be considered securities, they're going to need to go through compliant offerings, which may be a Reg A plus or otherwise. Munib, I'd love to hear about kind of some of your journey so far going down the Reg A plus route, where you are today, and potentially any pain points you care to expose.
First of all, I'm going to give them a big, big hand for that Reg A plus. That's a fantastic filing. Took a lot of money and time. It's fantastic. You did a great job for the industry to bring up these questions and to have them be thought about.
Thank
so,
you.
Thank you
So much. Yeah, it was a lot of work. I can give you a little bit background story. So, I think the U.S. and the SEC takes a different perspective than some of the other jurisdictions around the world, and for good reason, right? Like if you talk to the folks at SEC, you would notice that they would point you. So Chairman Clayton gave a public talk in which he would point to the U.S. securities markets and how well they've been performing over decades. And part of the reason is the oversight from the SEC, and how when a company is going public, there are disclosure requirements. You need to have, basically you open up your books and you tell the world about exactly what you do, what your financial situation is, what your business models are, what your revenue structure is, so on and so forth, right? So
You're protecting against information asymmetry.
Exactly. You're reducing information asymmetry, and it's especially important when you're talking about the general public. You're not talking about sophisticated investors who understand the kind of risks that they're taking, right? So I completely appreciate all the work that they do, and when it comes to the crypto market, it's kind of like the wild west, right? Like people are like throwing money at projects with very little information about like what these projects are, what they do, who the team is, so on and so forth. And for us, like especially being based out of the U.S., we're based out of New York. The options available were should we block the U.S. General public from accessing our network? It doesn't make sense, right? Like the Silicon Valley is here. We want all these developers, companies building on our platform. Or should we kind of like try to figure out how this new technology fits into existing regulations? That's the path that we ended up exploring more. Other paths that other projects were looking more into are trying to pass new law. We think that that would take longer and is very unpredictable. And I think the key insight for me was when I realized that the technology can adapt faster to regulations than regulations can adapt to the technology. So we would figure out that, hey, why would this particular piece of our network might be problematic? And we would just tune the technology to make sure that at the protocol level, this is no longer an issue, right? And I think we kept iterating that way. We made a lot of progress. The offering is not qualified yet. And fingers crossed, let's see what happens. The SEC has never qualified any such offerings before. So we are hoping that they would open up a path for regulated token offerings in the US.
Your offering,
We all are.
Your filing came right at the end of the term, so my students didn't really have time at Fordham to spend a lot of time reading it, but they are incredibly interested in the ability for non-accredited investing. Not to say they have any money, they probably have lots and lots of student debt, but throughout the course, they fixated on Reg CF, how could they get that be moved from 1 million per year to 2 or 3 or 5 million per year. They just thought that was so democratic, and that the way that the regulations are in place now are not. And so they kept slipping back a little bit into thinking that some of the offerings that were done in 2017 might be democratic, and then they remembered they were in a law school. That didn't work so well for them. But I think that this whole ability to be able to get Reg A+ filings done, to increase the CF under the Jobs Act would be great.
Yeah, and I would like to clarify this, not just about investing for us, right? Like we have raised capital before. It's about opening up our network to the general public. Like it can't be that you need to be an accredited investor to use these tokens on our network. So that's the key thing that we're looking at.
And Donna, really quick, they did raise the Reg CF. It's 1.07 now.
Oh, yeah,
so,
sorry. Yes,
life,
yes. So
life,
we were
life
always
is good.
talking about 2 to 5, so for them the other little 7 didn't count.
Mance, I'd love to hear your perspective on this conversation. We had we talked recently in Toronto, and so you've obviously gone through your SAFT offering. I'd like to hear more about how you're approaching the space and some of the pain points that may exist for you right now.
Yeah, so we did Reg D. We had a Reg D offering last year. And the challenge is that while clearly the SAFT offering was a security, and we treated it as a security, continue to treat it as a security, there has to come a time in which when we issue those tokens to those that purchase the SAFs, that those tokens then can be traded or used for their intended purpose, and that is to be able to purchase the services of the network, right? Our network is a general purpose network. Think of it sort of like Ethereum. You can build distributed applications on top of it. Those applications use the services of the network, and when they do, they pay for those services using the token. So there is this gap, a chasm, if you will, between the time when you've finished raising money through a SAFT, and when you issue those tokens to the investors, and the tokens then are being used as a utility token on the network to purchase the services. And the question is, what happens between those two events that converts the security instrument into something that's not a security? And of course, there are a number of good projects that are proposing models for how to handle this. The SEC, in my opinion, is looking for a light switch. You know, they're looking for an event that when you flip it, you know, you have that event and you flip the switch, you automatically go from being a security to not a security. I think the reality is very different. I think the reality is that there is this process through which the token becomes decentralized and increasingly becomes used for its intended purpose and decreasingly becomes used maybe for investment. But they're both, and they're both happening at the same time. And that's what the tension is. That's why it's such a hard problem, is because it's not one or the other, you know, on day one and day two. There's this bridge, you're crossing the chasm, so to speak, and there are a set of activities or indicators that are markers that you are in fact on this path to full decentralization, and there needs to be an opportunity for projects like ours and others to achieve that decentralization and achieve the status of not being a security. But you know, this is the hardest problem in the market today, in my opinion. You heard me say this in Toronto, if I had a magic wand and I could solve any problem for the industry, it would be this. You know, give me regulatory clarity, give me a path that I can follow to get across that bridge, to cross that chasm, and the whole market opens up in a way that we've not yet seen. And I think, you know, everyone is waiting and praying for that day.
So we directly address this issue in our public offering, right? So basically just some historic background. What happened was that the SEC, in a way, grandfathered Ethereum in, right? They basically said, they made no comment about how Ethereum was launched, how Ethereum was in previous years, and they said if you look at Ethereum today and only look at it today, it is not a security.
It was Hinman who said it, not the SEC.
Hinman first said it, but then the SEC came back and confirmed that as an official stance as well.
Quasi, okay.
So basically, from their perspective, the Ethereum network as it stands today is not a security. The problem that you're pointing out is how do you get to that state? How do you launch? And then what happens? What's the path that you travel to get to that state? And we call it the path to decentralization in our offering. And we are basically presenting our analysis for what it might look like. And it remains to be seen that is that a path that the SEC would agree with, that yes, if you do this, at some point you would not be a security. And what happens when you're no longer considered a security, right? So what we are looking at is that you will no longer have reporting requirements.
Well, when you're ready to throw your sufficiently decentralized party on X date, I expect an invite.
I just want to jump in and say, I mean, I think that we have to always remember the context in which Hinman was speaking and first did is sufficiently decentralized, meaning we were having so many offerings that were being based on Ether and the Ethereum blockchain at that particular time. They were under, between the commodities and CFTC and the SEC, they were trying to negotiate and figure out how can they not literally kind of blow up the market. And so arrived this compromise, this pathway, totally unclear how you get there. As you say, you're completely right. But they needed something to calm people down at that particular time, and I think it was June of 2019 in which you get, but there was talk already in April, at your dinner last year, that we were talking about it already. What was the SEC and the CFTC going to do, and how are they going to negotiate this? And that that they really viewed this as a one-off for something that was already out there. So they, in some senses, clarified the market, but made it much more unclear by giving you no markers, no real clear markers to get to decentralized.
Right.
Paula, we've been tackling the U.S. market here a bit, but would love to hear some of your experience. You're currently going through the process for an EU banking charter. What does that look like for you currently, and do you have any kind of global expansion beyond that you envision?
Yeah, I mean, when we initially set out to get the license, we gave them this, and for the last 18 months, the regulator has been giving us all the red lines of what can and cannot be done in the crypto space. We originally wanted to hold crypto assets on our balance sheet. That's not allowed yet in any European Union bank. We obviously building, again, as we said earlier, for purpose, so when this changes, we can pivot and do this. There is a bit more clarity now around regulation in Europe in the crypto space. Malta has introduced a very, very interesting legislation. Switzerland has followed through. France has recently introduced a very interesting legislation as well, which even enables banks to open bank accounts for some crypto companies. So there's movement. There isn't synergy across all the European Union countries, but certainly there's more adoption and there's more open-mindedness around the industry. From our perspective, I mean, we are navigating. We like to navigate within regulation because we're going to be a bank, and because we are a bank, whether we are a European Union bank or not, we're going to have to deal with the US regulator inevitably and the Singaporean regulator. So the approach we're taking is the moment we get licensed, we want to be getting a license in the US, a license in the UK, and a license at least in Singapore, because at least it gives us our ability to know what we cannot do within those jurisdictions. I mean, crypto in particular is a cross-border industry, so it will be inevitable that our clients are going to be doing things in multiple jurisdictions, so we should at least protect ourselves as much as possible by being regulated in those jurisdictions. And timing-wise, I mean, we're expecting to be licensed in Europe around September, October, and hopefully launch in the US with a banking license in the US in 2020.
We're excited for that. We've got some time for questions. I'd love to open it up. Quick hand.
Regarding the token becoming security to non-security, as I understand Hinman's comment, the core was information asymmetry between the operator of the network and the token holders. And I think SEC's position is so long as there is information asymmetry between the operators of the network and the token holders, it will have the disclosure requirement and so on and so forth. So from that premise, whether you agree or not, from that premise, do you think any of the proof of stake networks and the tokens running on those networks can ever be considered a non-security? Or will there be any issue when, and I've heard rumors that one of the reasons why Ethereum is not going into or delaying going into proof of stake because of this particular issue, that it might become a security, or is that a concern event?
So I can give you a non-answer from my side, and that non-answer is that whenever people try to sit and discuss that something is a security or not, my reaction is usually like, none of us are qualified to do that, right? So we should just leave that to the actual experts, like securities lawyers and the regulators, to go deep into what the issues are. And I think for this, like the SEC did issue a guideline document recently, and the guideline is like pretty much like what we expected, and they are pointing people to the Howey test, to how it applies to these tokens as well. But in general, I think it's a very complicated issue, and you can't really point to just one thing about information asymmetry and draw conclusions from there.
I mean, I think there's a range which people would answer that question. So some people might point to on the opposite side of where their filing stands, the template filing relating to Ethereum and whether or not the miners could be deemed to be broker-dealers, and have asked the SEC to clarify that. I'm sure there are other issues that will come up as well that relate to everything in every little element of SEC jurisdiction, and slowly but surely, as these issues come up, they're going to have to clarify them. So I think it's difficult, and I think the biggest problem is one that the lack of clarification on all these sub-issues relating to whether or not an aspect falls into the securities regulatory framework is for the customers. Because the customers for digital assets that are securities or could be securities say, well, if there's not so much clarity, maybe I'll buy it next year. And so I think that holds down, back some of the investment into the asset class.
There's like only 38 bullets to work through, so.
Yeah, and the framework, yes, about 38 bullets.
We've probably got time for one more question.
Dig a little bit more into the weeds here. When you came up earlier in the mostly lawyers panel, and they talked specifically about 12G. And my understanding quickly is that though you're doing a Reg A plus offering, you're declaring that you're not actually an equity security under 12G.
That's
Could you
correct.
explain a little bit and give us some background there?
So
You're going to have an Esquire after your name at the end of this.
So basically, let me give you a little bit of high-level answer first, right? Our stance is that this is a utility token. Our netbook is live. We have more than 100 applications. Users are already using those applications. They can already use the token on the netbook, so it clearly has utility even today, right? And then we also got legal opinions from like half a dozen jurisdictions around the world, like UK, France, Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, where in the legal opinions that we got, this is not treated as a security in those jurisdictions. In the US, given the framework that the SEC uses for looking at these assets, due to an abundance of caution, we are complying with securities regulations anyway, right? And while doing that, and given the kind of like the Reg A offering structure, like if this was a different structure, if it was an S1, I would have to look into like how that would play out. But given the Reg A framework, we are arguing that we don't have these reporting requirements, that they don't make sense to us.
Yeah, and I think that on that panel, what they meant was also that if he had said if he wasn't a security, but I think that what they're doing is really, really clever for the industry as well, is because you take the most conservative case and have the SEC give their go-ahead, hopefully, on it. And then little by little, you layer in other elements that have a twist. He doesn't have to go back to all of the other ones. It's not like he has to start from square one just because he adds a little wrinkle. So each wrinkle on every subsequent Reg A could make ultimately things more clear. Maybe in the second year you could do 2 wrinkles and they won't notice.
All right, I'm ready for a drink. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the
Thank you.
panelists.
Thank you so much.